Did you ever stop and think about the cereals from the 1980s that are now illegal to sell? These breakfast favorites shaped morning routines so completely that nobody imagined they could carry hidden risks. And if the bowls we trusted back then vanished from shelves, what else did we overlook? Cereals colored with red dye number 2 were some of the most visually striking boxes on grocery store shelves throughout the 1980s, drawing children's eyes with their brilliant fruity shades and promises of wild berry flavor. The dye made everything look more exciting, from the cereal pieces themselves to the cartoon mascots printed on the packaging. Families poured bowl after bowl without any idea that the vivid color came from a chemical flagged by researchers for its connection to cancer. The ban had technically arrived in 1976, but older inventory meant some products continued appearing on shelves into the early 80s. Parents trusted brand names and colorful packaging, never thinking to study the ingredient list. Kids reached for these cereals because they looked like candy, and nobody warned them otherwise. Regulators moved slowly, leaving families exposed to something that should have disappeared much sooner. It is unsettling to realize that the bright red and pink hues we associated with fun were quietly tied to a substance the government declared too dangerous to swallow. Cereals with cinnamyl anthranilate flavoring offered a grape or cherry taste that made every bite feel like a small piece of candy had tumbled into the breakfast bowl. This synthetic flavoring was everywhere in the 1980s, hiding inside the coatings, dust, and artificial fruit pieces that made sugary cereals irresistible to children. The flavor was sweet, sharp, and unmistakably artificial. The kind of taste that lingered on the tongue long after the milk turned purple or pink. Families never questioned it because it tasted good and came in boxes decorated with trusted characters and cheerful promises. But scientists eventually discovered a troubling pattern in laboratory tests, linking the compound to potential cancer risks that had gone unnoticed for decades. By the time regulators finally stepped in and banned it, millions of bowls had already been consumed. Looking back, it feels strange to think that something designed to make breakfast more enjoyable was quietly carrying risks nobody discussed at the kitchen table. Those sweet, fruity cereals were symbols of childhood joy, but behind the flavor was a chemical that science would eventually decide had no place in food. Cereals containing brominated vegetable oil had a peculiar role in the breakfast aisle during the 1980s, used to keep citrus flavoring evenly suspended in the product so every bite tasted consistent. This additive was invisible, odorless, and completely unknown to families who simply wanted their orange-flavored cereal to taste the way the commercials promised. Nobody realized that bromine, the element at the heart of this chemical, could accumulate in the body over time and cause problems ranging from skin issues to nervous system concerns. Parents poured these cereals into bowls with complete trust, believing that anything sold in a supermarket had been thoroughly tested and approved. The truth was more complicated. Regulators in other countries began banning brominated vegetable oil long before the United States took action, leaving American families exposed while the rest of the world moved on. Today, several states have finally outlawed this additive, but for decades it sat quietly in cereals that children ate every morning. The cheerful orange mascots on the box never mentioned what was lurking in the formula. Cereals with in-box plastic toys touching food were once one of the greatest thrills a child could experience at the breakfast table. The prize sat buried somewhere deep inside the bag, wrapped in thin plastic or sometimes not wrapped at all, waiting to be discovered by eager fingers digging through flakes and puffs. Kids loved the hunt, shaking boxes in store aisles to hear the rattle, then racing home to plunge their hands into the cereal and emerge victorious with a tiny figurine, decoder ring, or miniature game. Parents tolerated the mess because the joy on their children's faces was worth a few spilled Cheerios. But what nobody considered was how those small plastic parts could break, chip, or detach, turning a harmless prize into a choking hazard sitting inches from a child's mouth. By 1988, millions of toys were recalled after reports of children gagging on broken pieces. The magic of finding treasure in your breakfast slowly faded as safety concerns grew louder. Today, prizes are sealed outside the food, if they exist at all, and the golden age of in-box toys belongs to a world that no longer trusts small plastic buried in places children eat. Cereals preserved with unregulated BHA levels were quietly sitting in pantries across America throughout the 1980s, their freshness protected by a chemical that would later become one of the most debated food additives in history. Butylated hydroxyanisole kept fats from going rancid, extending shelf life in ways that made mass production profitable and convenient. Families appreciated that their cereal stayed crispy for weeks without developing strange tastes or smells. Nobody thought twice about an ingredient listed in tiny print that sounded scientific and harmless. But researchers in Europe and Japan began raising serious questions about whether BHA might be carcinogenic, especially at levels that accumulated through daily consumption. The United States allowed far higher concentrations than other countries, and parents had no way of knowing they were feeding their children something regulators elsewhere had restricted. Looking back, it is troubling to realize how casually these preservatives entered the food supply and how long it took for anyone to demand better oversight. The cereal stayed fresh, but the questions about what it cost lingered much longer. Cereals sweetened with cyclamate offered a calorie-free sweetness that seemed almost too good to be true in an era obsessed with convenience and flavor. This artificial sweetener had been banned in the United States in 1970, but imported cereals and products that slipped through regulatory cracks continued appearing on American shelves into the 80s. Parents trying to reduce sugar in their children's diets sometimes reached for these options without realizing cyclamate had been pulled from domestic production due to concerns about bladder cancer in laboratory animals. The sweetener blended seamlessly with other ingredients, making detection nearly impossible for anyone who did not scrutinize every label. Kids ate these cereals believing they were healthier alternatives, completely unaware that a banned substance was providing the sweetness they loved. Regulators struggled to monitor every imported product, and enforcement gaps allowed cyclamate to persist far longer than it should have. The morning cereal that once seemed like a smart choice now feels like a gamble nobody should have been asked to take. Cereals marketing disease prevention claims without approval were boldly promising health benefits that would never survive modern regulatory scrutiny. Boxes declared that eating a particular cereal could lower cholesterol, prevent heart disease, strengthen bones, or boost immunity in ways that sounded scientific but had little evidence behind them. Parents shopping for their families saw these claims and assumed they had been verified by doctors or government agencies. The reality was messier. Companies made statements based on flimsy studies or wishful interpretations, and regulators lacked the resources to challenge every misleading box on the shelf. Children grew up believing sugary cereal was practically medicine, a health food wrapped in cartoon characters and bright colors. By the time federal agencies cracked down on unsubstantiated health claims, an entire generation had already absorbed the message that breakfast cereal could cure whatever ailed them. Looking back, those bold promises feel almost absurd, but in the 1980s they shaped how families thought about nutrition in ways that took decades to undo. Cereals with lead-soldered packaging seams were silently contaminating breakfast tables in ways that nobody could see, smell, or taste. The metal seams that sealed certain cereal bag liners contained lead solder, a material that seemed perfectly safe to manufacturers focused on keeping products fresh and airtight. Nobody thought about what happened when acidic or moisture-rich foods sat against those seams for weeks at a time. Lead slowly migrated into the product, invisible particles drifting into flakes and clusters that children spooned into their mouths every morning. Families trusted packaging the way they trusted the food inside it, never imagining that the container itself could be the source of harm. Scientists eventually traced unexpected lead exposure back to food packaging, prompting bans and redesigns that arrived far too late for the families already affected. The cereals themselves were not the problem. The way they were stored and sealed was quietly introducing a heavy metal into homes that prided themselves on healthy breakfasts. Today, packaging standards have changed dramatically, but the memory of lead hiding in plain sight remains one of the most unsettling revelations of that era. Cereals containing yellow dye number 5 without warnings were pouring brightness into breakfast bowls without any mention of the risks hiding inside that cheerful color. This petroleum-derived dye gave cereals their sunny yellows and lemony hues, making every box look more appealing under fluorescent grocery store lights. Children loved the colors, parents loved the smiles, and nobody stopped to wonder what made those shades so vivid. The truth was that yellow dye number 5 could trigger allergic reactions, hyperactivity, and other symptoms in sensitive individuals, especially children who consumed it daily. In the 1980s, labeling requirements were minimal, and warnings about potential reactions were virtually non-existent. Families with children who struggled with unexplained behavioral issues had no way of connecting those symptoms to the cereal on their breakfast table. It took years of advocacy before regulators mandated disclosure labels informing consumers about this dye. By then, countless families had unknowingly exposed their children to something that could have been avoided with a simple warning. Cereals. Advertising directly to children during cartoon programming represented one of the most aggressive marketing strategies of the 1980s, flooding Saturday morning airwaves with colorful mascots and promises of prizes that made kids beg their parents for specific boxes. Every commercial break brought another animated character dancing across the screen, holding a spoon, and declaring that this cereal was the tastiest breakfast a child could ever experience. The advertisements were designed by experts who understood exactly how to capture young attention and create desire that overrode parental resistance. Children memorized slogans, sang theme songs, and identified cereals by mascot before they could read ingredient labels. Parents found themselves outmatched by campaigns worth millions of dollars, designed to make their children loyal customers before kindergarten. Regulators eventually recognized the ethical problems with targeting children who lacked the ability to distinguish advertising from entertainment. New rules restricted how companies could market sugary foods to minors, but those protections arrived after cereal commercials had already shaped an entire generation. Cereals fortified with excessive synthetic vitamin levels were marketed as nutritional powerhouses during the 1980s, promising parents that a single bowl could deliver everything a growing child needed. The boxes displayed charts and percentages that made the cereal seem almost medicinal, a concentrated dose of health wrapped in sugar and colorful shapes. Families believed they were making responsible choices by selecting these fortified options, trusting that more vitamins meant better nutrition. But the science told a different story. When children ate fortified cereal alongside vitamin supplements, fortified juice, and enriched bread, the synthetic nutrients accumulated to levels that exceeded safe limits. Vitamin toxicity became a quiet concern among pediatricians who noticed symptoms parents never connected to breakfast habits. Other countries began restricting fortification levels, recognizing that too much could cause real harm. American regulators moved more slowly, leaving families to navigate a food supply where nearly everything claimed to be enriched. The cereals that once seemed like the healthiest choice now represent a cautionary tale about how marketing can outpace safety. Cereals packaged in BPA-lined inner bags sat in pantries across America throughout the 1980s, their plastic liners quietly leaching chemicals into the food they were supposed to protect. Bisphenol A was everywhere in food packaging during that era, valued for its ability to create durable barriers that kept products fresh and crisp. Nobody questioned what happened when those liners sat against cereal for weeks at a time, absorbing warmth from kitchen shelves or garage storage. Parents poured breakfast for their children without any idea that the packaging itself might be introducing something harmful into every bowl. Scientists would later discover that BPA acted as an endocrine disruptor, interfering with hormones in ways that affected development and reproductive health. The chemical migrated most readily when exposed to heat, meaning cereals stored in warm environments carried the highest contamination. By the time regulators began restricting BPA in food packaging, decades of exposure had already occurred. Those cheerful boxes with their cartoon mascots concealed a danger nobody saw coming, hidden not in the cereal itself, but in the material designed to keep it safe. Cereals with potassium bromate in the flour offered a texture and consistency that bakers and manufacturers prized throughout the 1980s. This chemical additive strengthened dough and helped cereals maintain their shape during processing, creating the crisp, uniform pieces that tumbled so satisfyingly into breakfast bowls. Families never saw this ingredient listed prominently because it was considered a processing aid rather than a direct additive, hiding in the fine print that nobody bothered to read. But potassium bromate carried risks that would eventually alarm food safety experts around the world. Studies linked it to kidney damage and potential carcinogenic effects, prompting countries across Europe and Asia to ban it entirely from their food supplies. The United States moved more cautiously, allowing its continued use while other nations protected their citizens. Children ate these cereals morning after morning, trusting that anything sold in a grocery store must have been thoroughly tested. The flour that gave their favorite cereals such perfect crunch was quietly carrying a chemical that science would eventually declare too dangerous for human consumption. Cereals containing butylated hydroxytoluene preservative lined supermarket shelves throughout the 1980s. Their freshness protected by a chemical cousin of BHA that raised equally troubling questions. BHT kept the fats in cereal from turning rancid, extending shelf life in ways that benefited manufacturers far more than the families who ate the products. The preservative appeared in ingredient lists without fanfare, just another scientific-sounding name that parents glossed over while checking for sugar content. But researchers in Japan and parts of Europe were already documenting concerns about BHT and its potential to cause tumors in laboratory animals. These countries restricted or banned its use while American regulators maintained that existing levels were safe. Families had no way of knowing that the same cereal sold overseas contained different preservatives because foreign governments had decided BHT posed unacceptable risks. The boxes looked identical, the mascots smiled the same way, but what lurked inside varied dramatically depending on where you lived. American children consumed BHT daily while their counterparts elsewhere ate cleaner formulations. Cereals with small metal charms as mail-order prizes captured the imagination of children throughout the 1980s, offering treasures that felt more valuable than the plastic toys buried directly in boxes. Kids would carefully cut proof of purchase seals, stuff them into envelopes, and wait weeks for packages containing tiny metal figures, medallions, or collectible pins that gleamed with an almost magical quality. These prizes felt special because they required patience and effort, transforming breakfast into a treasure hunt that stretched across multiple boxes. But the metal used in many of these charms contained lead-based paints and coatings that manufacturers never disclosed to families. Children handled these prizes constantly, putting them in pockets, holding them during play, and sometimes even placing them in their mouths. The lead exposure accumulated silently, causing damage that would not become apparent until years later. When safety regulations finally caught up with these promotional items, the era of metal cereal prizes quietly ended. The charms that once felt so precious now represent a hidden danger that nobody thought to question. Cereals marketed as complete breakfast meal replacements made bold claims throughout the 1980s that would never survive modern advertising standards. Boxes proclaimed that children could skip eggs, fruit, and toast entirely because this single bowl provided everything a growing body needed. Parents rushing through hectic mornings embraced these promises, believing they were giving their kids adequate nutrition despite the time crunch. The advertisements showed happy families gathering around bowls of colorful cereal, implying that this sugary start was not just acceptable, but optimal. Nutritionists knew better, but their voices were drowned out by marketing budgets that dwarfed any public health campaign. Children grew up believing that cereal alone constituted a balanced meal, a misconception that shaped eating habits for decades. When regulators finally cracked down on misleading nutritional claims, the damage to public understanding of healthy breakfasts had already been done. Those confident declarations on cereal boxes taught an entire generation that convenience could replace genuine nutrition, a lesson that proved difficult to unlearn. Cereals containing propyl gallate preservative appeared on breakfast tables throughout the 1980s, their ingredient lists featuring yet another chemical designed to extend shelf life at unknown cost. This antioxidant worked alongside BHA and BHT to prevent fats from spoiling, creating a triple layer of preservation that kept cereals fresh for months. Families appreciated the convenience without ever wondering what these chemicals might be doing inside their bodies. propyl-galate raised concerns among researchers who documented potential links to tumors and reproductive issues in laboratory studies. Countries with stricter food safety standards began restricting its use while the United States maintained approval at levels other nations considered unacceptable. Parents selecting cereals for their children had no way of comparing international safety standards or understanding why the same product might be formulated differently overseas. The preservative sat quietly in boxes decorated with friendly characters, promising nothing but freshness while carrying questions that science was only beginning to answer. Those morning bowls contained more than just cereal and milk. Cereals with azotocarbonamide bleached flour offered the bright white appearance that consumers associated with purity and quality throughout the 1980s. This chemical bleaching agent transformed yellowish flour into the pristine powder that produced cereals with consistent color and appealing texture. Manufacturers valued it for both its bleaching properties and its ability to strengthen dough during processing. Families never questioned why their cereal looked so uniformly pale, assuming that whiteness simply meant cleanliness. But azotocarbonamide gained notoriety when consumers discovered it was also used to create foam plastics, including yoga mats and shoe soles. The same chemical making cereals white was making synthetic materials springy. Health concerns mounted as researchers examined what happened when this compound broke down during baking, potentially forming chemicals linked to respiratory issues and cancer. Europe and Australia banned azotocarbonamide from food entirely, while American cereals continued using it. The disconnect between international standards left families unknowingly consuming something that other governments had deemed unfit for breakfast. Cereals sold with realistic toy weapon offers through box-top promotions reflected a different era of marketing that would be unthinkable today. Throughout the 1980s, children could mail away proofs of purchase and receive toy guns, knives, swords, and military equipment that looked startlingly authentic. These prizes were advertised directly on cereal boxes, featuring images of grinning kids wielding plastic arsenals earned through breakfast loyalty. Parents saw these promotions as harmless fun, part of the cowboy and soldier play that had defined childhood for generations. Nobody questioned whether cereal companies should be encouraging weapon play or whether these realistic toys might cause problems in schools and public spaces. The cultural shift came gradually as attitudes toward toy weapons changed and child advertising regulations tightened. Promoting realistic weaponry to children through food products eventually became prohibited, ending an era when breakfast could earn you a convincing replica firearm. Those box-top offers now seem like relics from a world with very different ideas about what belonged in children's hands. Cereals shipped in asbestos-insulated industrial containers traveled from factories to distribution centers throughout the 1980s in packaging that prioritized temperature control over safety. The large shipping containers that transported bulk cereal products often featured asbestos insulation, designed to protect against temperature fluctuations during long journeys. Warehouse workers handled these containers daily, breathing in fibers that drifted invisibly through loading docks and storage facilities. The asbestos never touched the cereal directly, but the infrastructure surrounding food distribution was riddled with this dangerous material. Families eating breakfast had no connection to the industrial processes that brought products to their local stores, no awareness of the workers exposed along the supply chain. When the dangers of asbestos became impossible to ignore, the entire shipping industry underwent transformation. Insulation materials changed, containers were redesigned, and regulations forced companies to protect workers. The cereal itself was always safe, but the journey it took to reach kitchen tables carried hidden dangers that took decades to address. Cereals with partially hydrogenated vegetable oils offered a shelf stability that seemed like pure convenience during the 1980s, keeping products fresh for months without refrigeration. These trans fats were everywhere in processed foods, valued by manufacturers for their ability to extend product life while maintaining texture and taste. Families had no idea that the oils making their cereal stay crispy were simultaneously damaging their cardiovascular systems with every bowl. The fats accumulated in arteries, raised bad cholesterol, and lowered good cholesterol in ways that took years to become apparent. Children eating these cereals daily were unknowingly building health problems that would surface decades later. Scientists eventually connected trans fats to heart disease, strokes, and other serious conditions, prompting one of the most significant food reformulations in modern history. Regulators banned partially hydrogenated oils entirely from the food supply, forcing manufacturers to find alternatives. The cereals that once seemed harmless were quietly contributing to a public health crisis nobody recognized until the damage was done. Cereals containing coal tar derived artificial colors brought vivid hues to breakfast bowls throughout the 1980s, using dyes that originated from industrial waste products. These synthetic colors were cheap, stable, and capable of producing shades that natural ingredients could never match. Manufacturers loved them because they made cereals look appealing under store lighting and maintained brightness throughout shelf life. Parents never questioned why their children's cereal glowed with colors that seemed unnaturally vibrant. The truth was that coal tar derivatives carried concerns about allergens, hyperactivity, and potential carcinogenic properties that researchers were only beginning to understand. Other countries moved faster to restrict these colorants, while American regulators allowed their continued use. Over time, consumer pressure pushed manufacturers toward natural alternatives derived from fruits and vegetables. The transition happened slowly, but eventually many synthetic dyes disappeared from cereals marketed to children. Those bright bowls of the 80s now serve as reminders of an era when industrial byproducts colored breakfast. Cereals offering slap bracelets as in box prizes captured the fashion obsession of the late 1980s, with accessories that wrapped around wrists with a satisfying snap. These flexible metal bands covered in fabric became must-have items for children who wanted to fit in with playground trends. Cereal companies recognized the opportunity and began stuffing specially marked boxes with bracelets that kids could collect and trade. The prizes seemed harmless until reports emerged of the fabric covering wearing away, exposing sharp metal edges that sliced into young skin. Children who wore the bracelets constantly found themselves with cuts on their wrists that looked alarming to teachers and parents alike. Schools began banning slap bracelets entirely, and cereal companies quietly ended promotions that had seemed so clever just months earlier. The Consumer Product Safety Commission investigated numerous complaints before the trend faded into memory. What started as an exciting prize became a cautionary example of how quickly a fad can turn dangerous when quality control fails to keep pace with demand. Cereals with titanium dioxide color additives used this whitening agent to create the bright, clean appearance that consumers associated with freshness throughout the 1980s. The additive made cereals look appealing by enhancing visual brightness and masking any natural discoloration that occurred during processing. Manufacturers valued titanium dioxide for its ability to create consistent appearances across millions of boxes produced in different facilities. Parents selecting cereals never considered what made certain products look so uniformly white and pristine. But researchers eventually discovered that titanium dioxide nanoparticles could damage DNA and potentially cause harmful effects when consumed regularly. The European Union banned titanium dioxide in food products entirely, forcing American companies selling overseas to reformulate their recipes. Cereals sold domestically continued using the additive, while identical products shipped to Europe contained different ingredients. The disparity highlighted how food safety standards vary across borders, leaving American families exposed to additives that other governments deemed unacceptable. Cereals displaying cartoon mascots for high-sugar products represented a marketing strategy so effective that it eventually triggered regulatory backlash. Tony the Tiger, Toucan Sam, the Trix Rabbit, and dozens of other animated characters became more recognizable to children than many real-world figures. These mascots appeared on boxes, in commercials, and in promotional materials that surrounded children with constant reminders of sugary cereals. Kids formed emotional attachments to characters whose sole purpose was selling products loaded with sugar and artificial ingredients. Parents found themselves battling brand loyalty that children developed before they could read nutrition labels. The psychological manipulation was thorough enough that some families struggled to introduce healthier alternatives. Regulators eventually recognized that using beloved characters to market unhealthy foods to children crossed ethical boundaries. New advertising codes restricted how mascots could be used, limiting their appearance and requiring healthier reformulations. The beloved characters remain, but the rules governing their use reflect hard lessons about protecting children from sophisticated marketing. Cyclamate sweetened beverages were the original zero-calorie miracle drinks, promising all the sweetness of sugar with none of the guilt, and Americans embraced them with enthusiasm that bordered on devotion. Diet sodas, powdered drink mixes, and sugar-free desserts flooded the market, and health-conscious consumers believed they had finally found a way to enjoy sweetness without consequences. People drank these beverages daily, sometimes several cans at a time, trusting that 0 calories meant 0 harm. The taste was different from sugar, slightly chemical, but fans adapted quickly. What consumers did not know was that cyclamate was already under investigation by federal health officials concerned about troubling laboratory findings. Studies showed that rats fed high doses developed bladder tumors, and the evidence was strong enough that the FDA took dramatic action. In 1969, cyclamate was banned entirely, yanked from shelves with urgency that shocked loyal consumers. People who had been drinking these products for years suddenly wondered what damage might already be done. The ban became one of the first major food safety scandals to shake American confidence. Cottage cheese with rennet from calf stomach was once a wholesome staple that carried a darker story. Back in the 1950s, no one questioned where their food came from or what went into it. The process sounded simple enough: curdle milk, strain it, and add rennet to thicken the texture. But rennet wasn't just an ingredient. It came from the inner lining of a young calf's stomach, an enzyme extracted during slaughter. To most consumers, it was invisible, an unseen part of the dairy world. For decades, people spooned cottage cheese onto fruit, salads, and toast without realizing the cost behind its creamy texture. When animal rights movements gained traction in the 1970s, rennet production came under fire. It wasn't just the ethics, it was also the contamination risks. Using animal tissue carried the danger of bacteria and disease, especially before stricter processing standards existed. Eventually, scientists developed microbial and plant-based alternatives, and the old method faded quietly into history. Modern cottage cheese tastes the same, but it no longer carries that hidden story of sacrifice. For anyone who remembers the real thing, there's a bittersweet truth in knowing that the innocent foods of the past were often anything but. There was once a time when you could buy super-sized McDonald's items not just in restaurants, but frozen in grocery stores. Burgers, fries, and breakfast sandwiches packaged for the home promised that same fast food flavor anytime, anywhere. It was a symbol of convenience, of America's unstoppable appetite for more. The frozen line sold well at first, feeding late-night cravings and quick dinners. But soon, the tide began to turn. Documentaries and health advocates exposed the growing obesity crisis, linking it to portion sizes and processed foods. The phrase "supersize" became a public target, a warning instead of a badge of indulgence. Laws requiring calorie disclosures and nutritional transparency pushed McDonald's to retire the branding entirely. Shelves that once held those frozen giants went empty, replaced by smaller, healthier options. For many, it marked the end of an era, a time when fast food felt fun, not frightening. Yet there is something undeniably nostalgic about those oversized meals, wrapped in red and gold packaging that promised happiness in minutes. They were part of a bigger cultural story, one about convenience, excess, and the simple joy of biting into something you knew you should not. And maybe, deep down, that is why people still miss them, not for the taste, but for the freedom they once represented. Coal tar dyes colored the pickles, relishes, and specialty sauces served at fast food restaurants during the 1970s, giving condiments that vibrant artificial brightness that made them pop against buns and patties. The dyes were cheap, stable, and produced colors that natural ingredients could never match, so manufacturers used them freely. Customers squeezed bright yellow mustard and neon green relish onto their hot dogs without wondering where those intense hues came from. Children were especially drawn to the vivid colors, associating brightness with flavor. But coal tar dyes were derived from petroleum, and researchers began questioning whether ingesting them regularly posed health risks. Studies linked certain dyes to hyperactivity in children, allergic reactions, and potential carcinogenic effects. Regulators responded by banning some dyes outright and requiring stricter testing, forcing food manufacturers to reformulate products that had relied on artificial color for decades. Today, many fast food chains advertise natural colorings, a shift driven by consumer demand that traces directly back to concerns about the petroleum-based dyes that once seemed harmless. Kool-Aid and sugary fruit drinks flowed freely through school cafeterias in the 1980s, filling pitchers with bright colors that looked like liquid candy. Kids grabbed cups without hesitation, pouring glasses of red punch or grape drink that contained almost no actual fruit. The sweetness was intense, the colors vivid, and the appeal undeniable to young taste buds raised on similar drinks at home. Schools offered these beverages because they were cheap, easy to prepare, and popular enough to keep students hydrated. Parents assumed fruit drink meant something healthy, trusting labels that mentioned vitamins while ignoring the sugar content in smaller print. Each cup delivered a rush of sweetness that spiked energy levels before crashing them back down. But when obesity rates climbed and researchers examined what children actually consumed at school, sugary beverages became an obvious target. Federal regulations now strictly limit what schools can serve, permitting only water, plain milk, and 100% fruit juice. The pitchers of Kool-Aid and fruit punch have vanished entirely, replaced by hydration stations that offer nothing but what the body actually needs. Lard-based pie crusts dominated the dessert menus of fast food restaurants during the 1970s, giving cherry pies, apple turnovers, and fried fruit pastries that flaky, tender texture customers craved. Rendered pig fat was the baking industry's secret weapon, producing crusts that shattered perfectly with each bite and held fillings without getting soggy. Restaurants fried pies in the same lard, doubling down on a flavor profile that felt rich, satisfying, and undeniably delicious. Families finished meals with these treats, not realizing they were consuming significant amounts of saturated fat in a single dessert. The crusts were golden, the fillings were sweet, and the whole experience felt like a reward after a long day. But as research connected saturated fat to heart disease, lard fell out of favor across the food industry. Fast food chains switched to vegetable shortenings and eventually to formulations designed to reduce trans fats as well. The original lard-crusted pies disappeared from menus, replaced by versions that tasted different enough for longtime customers to notice. Today, those rich, flaky pastries exist only in memory and occasional nostalgic recreations. Margarine was sold as the heart-healthy miracle spread that would save American families from the dangers of butter, and in the 1970s, nearly every kitchen had a tub of it sitting in the refrigerator door. Doctors recommended it, nutritionists endorsed it, and advertisements showed happy families spreading it on toast with the confidence that they were making a smart, modern choice. People genuinely believed that switching from butter to margarine would protect their hearts and keep them healthier for decades to come. The spread was cheap, it melted smoothly, and it came in bright yellow packaging that made it look wholesome and natural. What nobody understood was that margarine was loaded with trans fats, artificially created through hydrogenation that turned liquid oils into solid spreads. These trans fats did not protect hearts at all. Instead, they clogged arteries, raised bad cholesterol, and increased the risk of heart disease far more than the butter they were meant to replace. Decades later, researchers would call trans fats one of the most dangerous ingredients ever introduced into the American food supply. Cereal boxes with actual toys inside were the ultimate treasure hunt for kids. Every morning, siblings fought over who got to dig through the cereal first, hands plunging deep into the box for a plastic ring or tiny car. The toys were part of childhood, as iconic as the cereals themselves. For companies, it was genius marketing. Sell sugar and joy in the same package. Parents saw harmless fun, and kids saw magic. But buried in all that excitement was a small, overlooked danger. Toys small enough to swallow, hidden in the very food they ate. But behind the fun was a danger no one saw coming. Some of the small prizes caused choking incidents, and regulators finally cracked down. What began as clever marketing turned into a public safety issue. The toys disappeared, replaced with paper coupons or codes printed inside the box. Breakfast lost a bit of its magic, replaced by the dull reality of safety regulations. For parents, it was relief. For kids, it was heartbreak. Those little toys might have been risky, but they also represented the wonder of growing up in a world that felt just a little more free. Before energy drinks or sports beverages, there were jungle juice barrels, tiny plastic jugs filled with sweet fluorescent liquid. They were cheap everywhere and perfectly sized for a kid's hand. The foil tops peeled back with a satisfying pop, releasing a sugary scent that screamed childhood. You could buy a handful for the change in your pocket, clutching them like treasure all the way home. The colors, bright blue, cherry red, electric green, felt alive, like liquid candy glowing under sunlight. Kids would trade flavors at lunch tables, sipping victory through tiny straws. But those bright colors and low prices came at a cost. The dyes used in some batches were later found to violate safety standards, and the thin plastic barrels posed choking and contamination risks. The Food and Drug Administration cracked down, and the barrels disappeared from stores. Still, everyone who grew up in the 90s remembers seeing them stacked in pyramids at grocery entrances, 5 for $1, glowing like treasure. It was the drink of summer camps, playgrounds, and birthday parties. Today, the thought of drinking one might make adults cringe, but for a generation of kids, that syrupy taste still feels like home. Raw egg milkshakes blended fresh at the counter were a protein-packed treat that bodybuilders and health enthusiasts ordered at fast food joints during the 1970s. Some restaurants advertised the addition of raw eggs as a nutritional boost, cracking shells directly into the blender alongside ice cream and flavored syrup. Customers watched the process with satisfaction, believing they were getting something extra that set their shake apart from the standard menu offering. The eggs made the texture richer and the drink feel more substantial, a meal replacement disguised as dessert. But raw eggs carry salmonella bacteria that cooking eliminates, and consuming them uncooked posed a genuine risk that most customers never considered. Outbreaks of salmonella linked to raw egg consumption eventually pushed health departments to ban the practice in commercial food service. Restaurants quietly removed the option from their menus, and the raw egg shake became a relic of an era that treated food safety far more casually. Today, the idea of cracking a raw egg into a fast food blender feels genuinely alarming, though it was once considered a healthy upgrade. Sugary breakfast cereals served as main courses were a strange but beloved part of school nutrition in the 1980s, appearing on lunch trays as if morning and midday had merged. Schools offered boxes of Frosted Flakes and Cocoa Puffs alongside milk cartons, letting students pour their own bowls right in the cafeteria. It seemed like a treat, a break from the usual mystery meats and overcooked vegetables. Kids loved the crunch, the sweetness, and the feeling that they were getting away with something reserved for Saturday mornings. Parents rarely questioned it because cereal was considered wholesome, fortified with vitamins the boxes proudly advertised. Nobody stopped to calculate how much sugar hid inside each colorful serving. The milk turned pastel shades as children slurped the last sweet drops, unaware of the nutritional void they had consumed. But when added sugar limits became part of federal school meal standards, those cereal boxes disappeared almost overnight. The sugar content far exceeded what regulators now permit. Today, breakfast cereals in schools must meet strict sugar caps that leave no room for the frosted favorites that once made lunch feel like a party. Hydrogenated vegetable shortening was marketed as the clean, modern, heart-healthy alternative to animal fats, and American kitchens in the 1970s embraced it wholeheartedly. Cans of fluffy white shortening sat beside every stove, used for frying, baking, and greasing pans, with the confidence that choosing vegetable-based fats was responsible. Cookbooks recommended it, doctors approved of it, and food manufacturers used it in everything from cookies to crackers to frozen dinners. The idea that vegetable oil could be transformed into a solid, shelf-stable product seemed like pure progress. What nobody understood was that hydrogenation created trans fats, artificial molecules the human body had never evolved to process. These fats did not pass through the system harmlessly. They lodged in artery walls, raised bad cholesterol to dangerous levels, and dramatically increased the risk of heart attacks. Decades of research would prove that trans fats were among the most dangerous substances ever added to the food supply. The shortening families trusted to make their biscuits flaky and fried chicken crispy was quietly contributing to an epidemic. Bleached flour with benzoyl peroxide was sold as the purest, whitest flour money could buy. Housewives loved it. It looked clean, modern, and scientifically improved. The bleaching process made the flour snow white, a symbol of quality and refinement in mid-century kitchens. In an age obsessed with hygiene and purity, white meant progress, and the food industry knew it. Magazines ran full-page ads showing spotless kitchens and immaculate loaves, as if color itself could signal contamination. The reality was far less pristine. Each bag carried traces of industrial chemicals that no one could pronounce. But the same chemical used to bleach the flour was also used in industrial processes, including plastics and cleaning agents. Over time, scientists found that benzoyl peroxide left behind chemical residues that affected digestion and possibly the nervous system. The flour looked perfect but carried unseen consequences. Bakers noticed something too. The bread made with it tasted flat, lifeless, and oddly sterile. By the time regulators banned the practice, America had learned another hard truth. Food does not need to look perfect to be good. Natural color, once seen as old-fashioned, became a mark of authenticity. The ghost white loaves of the 1950s gave way to the golden brown of something real again. Surge soda was the liquid embodiment of the word extreme. Released in the mid-90s as Coca-Cola's answer to Mountain Dew, it came in a neon green can that looked like it could power a skateboard. The drink promised adrenaline in a bottle, an energy boost before energy drinks were even a thing. Every can felt like an invitation to chaos, an explosion of sugar, caffeine, and citrus that hit harder than anything else on the shelf. The ads made you feel like cracking open a Surge could transform an ordinary afternoon into an action movie. For kids growing up in the 90s, drinking one felt like joining a secret club of unstoppable energy. Its marketing screamed rebellion, all graffiti logos, explosions, and kids jumping off rooftops. Every gulp was like tasting citrus chaos. Parents called it caffeinated sugar water, but that only made it cooler. Surge was banned in schools, whispered about like contraband, and adored by every kid who wanted to feel like a daredevil. It was more than soda. It was an attitude, a bright green middle finger to moderation. Even now, people remember that electric buzz, that rush of flavor that somehow felt alive. It wasn't just a drink. It was a moment in time bottled up for a generation that refused to slow down. Surge didn't just wake you up. It woke up an era. And when it vanished in the early 2000s, it left behind an entire generation of nostalgic fans who swore no drink has ever come close. For a moment, Surge wasn't just a beverage. It was the soundtrack to growing up loud. Saccharin packets without cancer warning labels sat in small glass dispensers on every fast food table during the early 1970s, offered freely to customers who wanted sweetness without sugar. Dieters shook the little pink packets into their coffee and iced tea, believing they had found a guilt-free solution to their cravings. The artificial sweetener had been around for decades, trusted by millions, and nobody imagined that regulators were about to require warning labels on every package. When studies suggested a possible link to bladder cancer in laboratory animals, the government mandated labels that shocked consumers. Suddenly, something that felt harmless came with fine print that made people pause before tearing open the packet. Fast food restaurants continued offering saccharin, but customers now faced an uncomfortable choice with every cup of coffee. The warning labels remained in place for years, creating confusion around a sweetener that many still use daily. Today, the labels are gone after further research softened the concerns. But the memory of that regulatory whiplash lingers as a reminder that approved additives can fall under sudden suspicion. Unlimited portion sizes with no calorie caps defined the generous spirit of school cafeterias in the 1980s, where lunch ladies piled food onto trays without measuring or restricting what students received. If you wanted more mashed potatoes, you got more. If the serving of spaghetti looked small, a friendly scoop made it larger. Schools operated on the philosophy that growing children needed fuel, and fuel meant food without limits. Nobody tracked calories because nobody thought calories mattered for kids burning energy on playgrounds. The lunch line moved fast, and portions reflected whatever fit on the tray rather than any nutritional calculation. Some students ate modest amounts while others piled their plates high, and both approaches were accepted. But childhood obesity rates began climbing in ways that alarmed health officials. Studies connected unlimited school portions to eating habits that followed children into adulthood. Federal regulations eventually imposed strict calorie ranges for school meals. Today, portion sizes are measured precisely, and seconds are often impossible to obtain. The abundance that once defined cafeteria culture has been replaced by careful control. MSG-laden canned soups lined the shelves of every grocery store in the 1970s, marketed as wholesome, convenient meals that busy families could trust to nourish their loved ones. Mothers heated them on cold afternoons, packed them in thermoses for school lunches, and served them alongside sandwiches with complete confidence that they were providing something nutritious. The labels showed pictures of fresh vegetables and steaming bowls that promised comfort in every spoonful. Families had no idea that the savory flavor they loved came from monosodium glutamate, a chemical flavor enhancer quietly stirring controversy in medical circles. Reports surfaced of people experiencing headaches, flushing, numbness, and heart palpitations after eating foods high in MSG. Researchers called it Chinese restaurant syndrome at first, but symptoms appeared wherever MSG was heavily used, including those trusted cans sitting in American pantries. The industry insisted the additive was safe, but doubt had taken root. Parents who once felt proud of their quick meals began questioning what else might be hiding behind those reassuring labels. Sizzlin was supposed to be the future of breakfast. Marketed in the 1970s as better than bacon, it promised the same smoky flavor with less fat and cholesterol. Commercials showed smiling families flipping perfect strips on the stove, proud to be eating healthier. But Sizzlin was not exactly what it claimed. It was a mix of pork and beef blended with artificial flavorings and fillers that barely qualified as real meat. Over time, new labeling laws and stricter regulations revealed that its marketing had been misleading. The product was pulled and Sizzlin quietly faded away. For those who remember it, the name still carries a strange nostalgia, half comfort, half caution. It was a glimpse into an era when we trusted packaging more than ingredients and believed that science could reinvent even bacon. Some memories sizzle out, others linger just long enough to remind us how good intentions can sometimes turn synthetic. Monosodium glutamate in kids' meal promotions was one of the food industry's favorite tricks during the 1970s, boosting flavor in ways that made children beg for more. Fast food chains loaded chicken nuggets, flavored fries, and dipping sauces with MSG because it made everything taste richer, saltier, and almost addictive. Parents had no idea that the ingredient their children craved was specifically engineered to trigger intense flavor responses that natural foods could not match. The meals came with toys, cartoons, and colorful packaging that made the whole experience feel innocent and fun. Kids ate eagerly, asking for seconds, while MSG quietly amplified every bite. When researchers began reporting headaches, flushing, and other reactions linked to high MSG consumption, public concern grew rapidly. Parents started reading labels, demanding answers, and questioning what exactly was in those happy little boxes. Regulatory pressure mounted, and many chains quietly reduced or removed MSG from their most child-focused offerings. Today, the additive is still legal but heavily scrutinized, and its presence in kids' meals has become far more controversial than anyone imagined decades ago. Processed hot dogs served every week were a cafeteria ritual that students anticipated with genuine excitement throughout the 1980s. The smell drifted through hallways before lunch started, that unmistakable aroma of salty, smoky meat that signaled something better than the usual fare. Kids lined up eagerly, watching lunch workers use tongs to pluck pink cylinders from warming trays and nestle them into soft white buns. The hot dogs came loaded with nitrates and sodium, preserved with chemicals that extended shelf life, but nobody cared about ingredient lists back then. Squiggles of ketchup and mustard completed the meal, and students devoured them in minutes. Schools loved hot dogs because they were cheap, easy to prepare, and never generated complaints. The tubes of processed meat checked every box that mattered in an era focused on convenience rather than nutrition. But research eventually linked processed meats to health concerns that regulators could not ignore. Nitrates, sodium levels, and overall quality came under scrutiny. Federal guidelines now restrict how often schools can serve processed meats, effectively ending the weekly hot dog tradition. Enriched white bread was the nutritional cornerstone of the American diet in the 1970s, sitting in nearly every bread box and toasted in nearly every kitchen across the country. Families believed they were getting wholesome nourishment with every sandwich, every piece of toast, and every slice served alongside dinner. The packaging boasted about added vitamins and minerals, making it seem like this soft, fluffy bread was actually good for growing bodies. Children ate peanut butter and jelly on it, mothers made French toast with it, and nobody questioned whether something so familiar could possibly be anything less than healthy. The truth was far more complicated than those cheerful labels suggested. White bread started as whole wheat, but milling stripped away the fiber-rich bran and nutrient-dense germ, leaving behind starchy flour with almost no nutritional value. Manufacturers then sprayed synthetic vitamins back onto the depleted flour and called it enriched, as if adding back a fraction of what was removed made it healthy. The result spiked blood sugar, provided minimal fiber, and filled bellies with empty calories disguised as nutrition. There was a time when buying imported cheese felt like sophistication itself. In the 1970s, raw milk cheeses, creamy, tangy, and full of character, became the mark of a true gourmet. They were made by hand, aged in cool cellars, and packed with rich, earthy flavor that pasteurized versions could never match. But the same bacteria that gave them depth also brought danger. Listeria, Salmonella, and E. coli lurked in the unpasteurized milk, invisible threats wrapped in golden wax. The Food and Drug Administration drew a line. Any cheese made from raw milk must be aged at least 60 days before sale to allow harmful bacteria to die off. That single rule shut the door on countless beloved imports. Cheeses from France, Italy, and Switzerland vanished from American markets, replaced by safer, blander versions. For many, it felt like losing a link to old-world culture, a trade of flavor for security. Even today, food lovers debate the rule, whether it protects us or just keeps us from tasting something truly real. But for those who remember that first bite of brie so soft it nearly melted on the tongue, the ban marked more than a change in law. It marked the end of an era when danger could still taste divine. White bread for every sandwich was the unspoken rule in school cafeterias throughout the 1980s. Soft slices that held together peanut butter, bologna, and whatever else lunch workers assembled each morning. The bread was pale, pillowy, and completely devoid of anything resembling whole grain nutrition. Kids loved it because it was familiar, the same bread their mothers used at home, the same texture they associated with comfort and normalcy. Nobody questioned whether refined flour was good for growing bodies because nobody thought about bread as anything other than a vehicle for fillings. Schools bought it in bulk because it was cheap, lasted long, and never drew complaints from picky eaters. The sandwiches stacked up on trays by the hundreds, wrapped in plastic or nestled in paper boats, waiting for hungry students who never imagined their bread choices mattered. But when nutrition science caught up with cafeteria menus, white bread became a symbol of everything wrong with school lunches. Federal mandates now require that at least half of all grains served in schools be whole grain rich, effectively banning the pure white bread that once dominated every lunch line. Salisbury steak drenched in high-sodium gravy was the kind of cafeteria comfort food that made even picky eaters clean their trays in the 1980s. The oval-shaped patties arrived swimming in thick brown sauce that glistened under serving line lights, looking like something from a home-cooked dinner. Kids loved how the gravy soaked into everything it touched, turning mashed potatoes into a savory puddle and making even overcooked vegetables taste acceptable. Lunch ladies ladled it generously, sometimes giving extra to students who asked politely. The saltiness was part of the appeal, that rich, almost addictive flavor that made you want to scrape every last drop from your tray. Nobody questioned the sodium content because nobody thought about sodium at all. It was simply good food that filled bellies and kept students happy through afternoon classes. But when nutritionists examined what schools actually served, the sodium levels in that beloved gravy raised immediate alarms. Federal guidelines now cap sodium strictly, and the gravy that once defined Salisbury Steak Day has been reformulated into something far less indulgent. If any of these banned cereal secrets stirred a memory or shocked you, share your story in the comments below. Tap like to spread the word, and subscribe so you never miss another trip into the breakfast aisle of the past.